A kid on a banana seat bicycle, no helmet, no shoes, pedaling down a 2-lane highway at dusk. His mother would not call him home for another hour. Nobody called the police. Nobody even looked twice. That was 1985, and that was normal. But dozens of things that every parent did back then have since been written into law as crimes, violations, or grounds for a knock on the door from Child Protective Services. Some of these rules will make you laugh. Others might genuinely shock you. So hit subscribe and settle in, because here are 60 parenting rules from the 1980s that are illegal now. If you grew up in the 1980s, you probably remember climbing into the back seat of your family car and sprawling across the vinyl bench without a seatbelt in sight. Some kids rode up front on a parent's knee or curled up on the rear window shelf like a cat in the sun. Seatbelt use among Americans hovered between 11% and 14% in the early 1980s, and most families treated the lap belt as an optional decoration. Tennessee became the first state to pass a child restraint law in 1978, but enforcement was almost non-existent. It took until 1985 for all 50 states to require car seats, and even then, surveys found 65% of parents were installing them wrong. The restraints offered little more than a padded shelf and a flimsy buckle. A sudden stop at 30 miles per hour turned an unrestrained child into a projectile, and the dashboard was solid steel with no give. Back in the 1970s, parents treated the open trunk space of a station wagon like it was the greatest playground ever invented. It was where kids sprawled out with pillows, blankets, and half-eaten snacks while the road blurred by outside the window. No one thought twice about the fact that the only thing separating a child from traffic was a thin piece of glass, and good fortune, families even called it the back room, as if the car was a moving house with a private suite reserved just for the wildest kid in the family. You could crawl, sit cross-legged, lie on your stomach, or press your face right up against the window and watch the scenery rush by. Parents genuinely believed they were giving their kids the best seat in the house, and kids loved every second of it. There was no fear of sudden stops or unpredictable swerves. No one worried about rollover accidents or what would happen if another car clipped a bumper. The 70s were full of moments where freedom meant pretending danger did not exist, and the way kids rode in cars was one of the clearest examples of that. Today, this same setup would get you pulled over in seconds and charged with neglect, because modern safety laws consider that trunk space a high-risk zone that no child should ever be anywhere near. The memory is sweet, but the practice is banned for good reason. Metal slides were standard equipment at every elementary school in the 1970s, and every kid who climbed one in July learned the same lesson the hard way. The sliding surface was galvanized steel, a single sheet of metal bolted to a frame, angled steeply with nothing but open air on the sides. On a summer afternoon, direct sunlight could push that surface past 130 degrees, hot enough to raise blisters on bare legs in seconds. You went down fast, or you got burned. There was no shade canopy, no plastic coating, no temperature warning. Just raw, sun-baked metal that the school considered perfectly functional. At the bottom, the exit ramp often ended abruptly, dumping riders onto packed dirt or asphalt with no deceleration zone at all. The CPSC would later acknowledge that even modern plastic slides can reach dangerous temperatures, but the all-steel versions of the decade made that hazard exponentially worse. The Ditto machine was the beating heart of every school office in the 1980s, and it came with a gift no teacher intended. Fresh worksheets arrived at your desk still damp, printed in that unmistakable purple ink, and carrying a sharp, sweet chemical smell that students treated like a reward. The duplicating fluid was a blend of methanol and isopropanol, two industrial solvents that vaporized on contact with air. Kids pressed their faces into the paper and inhaled deeply, sometimes competing for the freshest sheets with the strongest scent. Teachers rarely stopped them. The 1982 film Fast Times at Ridgemont High captured it perfectly, showing an entire classroom sniffing their handouts in unison. Nobody called it chemical exposure. They called it Tuesday. The A.B. Dick Company, which built most of the machines, filed for bankruptcy in 2004, long after photocopiers had replaced the purple-stained empire. Corporal punishment was not just allowed in the 1970s, It was expected. Teachers and principals kept wooden paddles hanging behind their desks, ready for anyone who talked back, forgot homework, or got caught chewing gum. One wrong move could mean a trip to the office where a wooden board, sometimes with holes drilled in it to make the sting worse, would be used in front of other students. Parents rarely objected, and most schools saw it as building character. Students learned early that fear kept order more than respect did. The sound of a paddle striking wood or desk was enough to quiet a whole hallway. Many adults who went to school then still remember that mix of embarrassment, fear, and anger, not the lesson that came after. Looking back now, it is hard to believe this was ever called discipline. It was control disguised as morality, and it left a generation who learned more about silence than self-expression. Whole milk served in every carton was the unquestioned standard in school cafeterias throughout the 1980s, sitting in metal coolers beside the lunch line like tiny white soldiers waiting to be chosen. Kids grabbed them without thinking, peeling back the paper spout and drinking deeply while chatting with friends. Parents believed milk was simply good for growing bodies, and nobody questioned whether the fat content mattered. The creamy richness felt like part of the meal itself, something that washed down the heaviest cafeteria foods and left a satisfying film on the lips. Teachers encouraged it, nurses praised it, and lunch ladies handed out extras to anyone who asked. But when federal nutrition guidelines changed, whole milk became a target almost overnight. Studies linked full-fat dairy in childhood to weight concerns that worried health officials nationwide. Regulators stepped in and declared that only skim or 1% milk could be offered to students in public schools. The cartons stayed the same, but the contents grew thinner and far less satisfying to those who remembered how milk used to taste. Cooking from scratch was one of the first lessons students tackled in home economics, and it set the tone for everything else. No boxed mixes, no frozen shortcuts, just raw ingredients turned into meals with patience and practice. Biscuits, casseroles, soups, and pies were staples, each one starting with flour, eggs, butter, and a few simple tools. Teachers walked students through every step: how to sift flour properly, how to knead dough until it was elastic, and how to test if something was fully cooked without relying on timers. Cooking from scratch mattered because it was about more than food. It was about independence. Knowing you could feed yourself or your family with just the basics was a form of security. The smell of bread baking or a casserole bubbling in the oven carried a pride that no box mix could match. Today, prepackaged meals and takeout are everywhere, and while they save time, they lack the satisfaction that came from creating something from the ground up. Back then, cooking was not just a class assignment. It was a foundation for adult life. Looking back, it is easy to see how valuable that skill was, and hard not to wonder why it disappeared from classrooms. You are not imagining it. Schools really used to let the principal hit kids with a wooden paddle. This was not a figure of speech or a rare punishment. It was standard. If you talked back, got into a fight, or even forgot your homework one too many times, you could be marched down the hallway, asked to bend over, and whop. That was your lesson for the day. Some of these paddles even had holes drilled into them, supposedly to increase speed. Others were carved with slogans like Board of Education, like it was some kind of joke. And it was not just principals doing it. Coaches, vice principals, even homeroom teachers were allowed to paddle students with little to no permission from parents. It was considered discipline. The thing is, a lot of kids just felt humiliated or afraid, not reformed. Over time, lawsuits and mental health studies pushed back. States started banning corporal punishment, and schools were forced to find new ways to deal with behavior. Today, hitting a student with a paddle is not just frowned upon, it is illegal in most places. But if you grew up in those earlier decades, you probably still remember the sound of it. The silence in the hallway, the held breath, the way it made everything just a little too real. Mimeograph handouts. If you were a school kid in the 1970s, you knew that deep purple ink on that soft, damp sheet meant one thing. You were about to do some real work. But before that, you probably took a deep inhale of that weirdly satisfying chemical scent. You know the one. The mimeograph machine was like the unholy cousin of a copy machine, and it sat in some locked room where only teachers dared go. These pages were always a little crooked, maybe smudged, but you didn't care. They were yours. You got to flip through them, doodle in the margins, and sometimes even finish your work early just so you could sniff it again. Teachers used them for quizzes, word searches, permission slips, and every once in a while, a coloring page that had been copied so many times it looked haunted. In a weird way, mimeograph paper felt like a rite of passage. That moment when your teacher passed the stack down your row and said, "Take one and pass it back," that was the stuff of legend. We did not know it back then, but these purple-stained sheets were little time capsules, packed with bad spelling, grainy graphics, and that unforgettable scent of school days gone by. Pizza first appeared in American school cafeterias in the late 1950s, tailor-made to appeal to children with rich, savory toppings such as pepperoni and sausage. Originally from Italy, this beloved dish was transformed in the U.S. with hearty, high-fat ingredients, providing a quick and satisfying student meal. Assembled with hand-stretched dough, slathered with tomato sauce, and layered with mozzarella and meats, the pizza is baked at high temperatures. This process melds the flavors and textures into a delicious offering with a crispy crust and a melted cheese topping. The combination of carbohydrates, protein, and fats met the nutritional needs of busy school environments efficiently, making pizza a consistent hit among students who relished the comforting taste and filling nature of each slice. Mercurochrome was the first thing your mother reached for when you came inside bleeding. That bright red-orange liquid dabbed onto a skinned knee or a sliced finger with a glass applicator stung just enough to make you believe it was working. Every medicine cabinet in the country had a bottle. What families did not know was that the active compound, merbramine, was a mercury derivative developed at Johns Hopkins University in the early 1900s. Mercury, even in small concentrations, is a neurotoxin that accumulates in fatty tissue with each exposure. It does not flush out, it builds up. Every scrape, every cut, every playground fall meant another dose absorbed directly through broken skin. Questions about its toxicity were raised as early as 1931, and poisoning reports surfaced for decades. The FDA spent half a century looking the other way, and it was not until 1998 that the agency finally reclassified mercurochrome as an untested drug, effectively pulling it from American shelves. The mercury thermometer sat in every medicine cabinet in America, a slim glass tube filled with liquid silver wedged between the aspirin and the iodine. When you had a fever, your mother placed it under your tongue and told you not to move. Mercury is a potent neurotoxin, sealed inside a tube thin enough for a child to snap with a single bite. A broken thermometer released roughly half a gram of elemental mercury, enough to push the air in a small bathroom well past safe exposure limits set by the EPA. The vapor was invisible and odorless. Kids rolled the silver beads across the tile floor with bare fingers, not knowing the metal absorbs through the skin on contact. By 2001, 13 states had banned mercury thermometers for home use. The Cabbage Patch Snack Time Kids doll was designed to be cute, interactive, and surprisingly hungry. Kids could feed it pretend snacks that disappeared into its mechanical mouth, as the doll chewed with a quiet whirring sound. At first, it felt like magic, a toy that could eat on its own. But that magic quickly turned into horror for many children. The doll's motorized mouth had no off switch, and it did not know the difference between plastic food and real fingers. Countless kids learned that the hard way, getting their hair or fingertips caught in the doll's relentless jaws. Parents rushed to pull the batteries, but even that sometimes did not stop it. The manufacturer recalled the dolls after several injuries, but not before the Snack Time Kids had earned a spot in toy history for all the wrong reasons. Despite its creepy legacy, some collectors still keep them. A strange reminder of how wild 1980s toy innovation could be. The idea of a doll that eats might sound innocent, but when it starts chewing on you, the fun ends fast. Alar-treated apples were everywhere in the 1980s, shining under grocery store lights with that perfect red color parents trusted completely. Farmers sprayed alar onto orchards because it kept apples looking beautiful longer, prevented them from falling too early, and made the fruit appear fresh on store shelves for weeks. Families bought them by the bag, slicing them into lunchboxes, baking them into pies, and handing them to children as the healthiest snack imaginable. Schools served them in cafeterias, and parents felt proud offering something wholesome instead of processed treats. But alar was a chemical called daminozide, and researchers eventually discovered it could break down into a substance linked to cancer, especially in children who consumed far more apples per body weight than adults. The moment those findings hit the news, panic spread faster than anyone expected. Stores pulled apples from shelves, orchards lost entire harvests, and families threw away fruit they had trusted just days before. Regulators banned alar almost overnight, leaving behind a shaken industry and parents who wondered how something sold as healthy could carry such hidden risks. It was perfectly ordinary for a 10-year-old to walk into a corner store in 1983, slap a crumpled dollar bill on the counter, and ask for a pack of Marlboros for Dad. The clerk would hand them over without blinking, sometimes tossing in a piece of penny candy for the trouble. There was no federal minimum age for purchasing tobacco in the 1980s. State laws varied wildly, and even where age restrictions existed, enforcement was almost non-existent. The Sinar Amendment, passed in 1992, was the first federal law requiring states to enforce minimum age tobacco sales, threatening to cut substance abuse funding for states that failed to comply. Before that, Philip Morris called proposed age limits a threat to their core business in a 1986 internal strategy document. Kids were not just buying cigarettes for their parents. They were the tobacco industry's future customers, and everyone from the manufacturer to the shopkeeper knew it. In the 1970s, a chemistry set was not a cute educational toy with colorful plastic parts and harmless powders. It was a full-blown miniature laboratory packed with glass tubes, real acids, flammable crystals, and tiny jars of mysterious substances that looked like they belonged in an underground bunker. Parents bought these sets proudly, believing they were helping their children become the next great scientist, completely unaware that half the experiments inside could burn eyebrows off or stain the kitchen counter forever. Kids mixed liquids that hissed or bubbled, heated metal spoons over open flames, and tapped glass vials together like they were indestructible. Some sets even included magnesium ribbon, sulfur, and small samples of chemicals that would never get past today's safety committees. The thrill of watching reactions spark to life made children feel powerful, as if they were discovering secrets adults could not access. The danger was part of the charm. These kits came with instructions that looked like they were copied straight out of a college chemistry class, and naturally, kids ignored half of them and improvised the rest. Parents were happy if no smoke alarm went off or if the curtains did not melt. Today, regulations have stripped chemistry sets down to the point where they barely foam or fizz because no company is allowed to sell anything that might ignite, corrode, or explode in a child's hands. What was once a sign of curiosity is now classified as a hazard. If you fell off anything on a 1970s playground, the ground was not going to help you. Across the country, the standard surface under swings, slides, and climbing bars was either poured asphalt, concrete slab, or hard-packed dirt trampled into something nearly as solid. A 1994 survey by the U.S. Public Interest Research Group examined 443 playgrounds nationwide and found that 92% lacked adequate shock-absorbing surfacing. The report concluded that a fall onto concrete from as low as 2 inches could produce a life-threatening head injury in a child. 2 inches. The entire concept of impact-attenuating ground cover, wood chips, rubber mulch, poured rubber, did not exist in standard practice. The CPSC would not publish its first surfacing recommendations until 1981, a full decade after the agency was created. Every fall from every piece of equipment ended the same way, on a surface that gave back exactly as much force as it received. Every science lab in the 1980s had a small square pad called wire gauze that students picked up with their bare hands and held directly over an open Bunsen burner. The heat-resistant center of that pad was made of asbestos. Every time a student adjusted the gauze while it was still warm or brushed the fraying edge with a finger, microscopic fibers could break loose and drift into the air. Nobody wore masks. Nobody wore gloves. The teacher said, "Be careful with the flame." The asbestos was never mentioned. Congress passed the Asbestos Hazard Emergency Response Act in 1986, requiring schools to inspect for asbestos every 3 years, but that law targeted building materials, not lab equipment. Those wire gauze squares sat undisturbed in classroom supply cabinets well into the next decade. Public punishment in classrooms was another normal part of 1970s schooling, and nothing symbolized that better than the dunce chair. If you were caught daydreaming, laughing too loud, or falling behind, you could be made to sit at the front of the class facing the wall while everyone else stared. Sometimes teachers made kids wear a paper hat or hold a sign that said slow or lazy. Humiliation was a teaching tool, and students were told it would make them stronger. But the truth was, it made children terrified of making mistakes. Many adults still feel that pang of shame when they think about being singled out for something as small as a spelling error. The dunce chair was less about correction and more about control, a way to remind everyone watching what happens if you step out of line. Today, that kind of cruelty would never pass as education. Deep-fried fish sticks made with trans fats were a cafeteria treasure that arrived every Friday like clockwork, golden and crispy and practically glowing under the fluorescent lights. Kids lined up eagerly because Fish Stick Day meant something special, a break from the usual rotation that felt almost celebratory. The breading crackled with each bite, giving way to flaky white fish that tasted vaguely of the ocean and heavily of the deep fryer. What nobody realized was that those fryers bubbled with partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, a cooking fat that made everything crispier and quietly dangerous. Lunch ladies loaded baskets and lowered them into shimmering pools of oil reused all week, each batch absorbing more trans fats that scientists would later connect to heart disease. Parents assumed fried fish was still healthy, still a reasonable choice for growing children. Schools kept serving them because the cost was low and the kids kept eating. But when the truth about trans fats finally surfaced, regulators moved fast. Today, partially hydrogenated oils are completely banned from school kitchens, and the fish sticks that remain taste different, lacking the signature crunch of the forbidden fats. Balancing a checkbook was a cornerstone of home economics. Every student learned how to track deposits, withdrawals, and expenses by hand, using nothing more than a pen, paper, and patience. The ledger was a simple grid, and the goal was accuracy. Your math had to match the bank's math. Teachers drilled the importance of recording every single transaction, whether it was $5 for gas or $20 for groceries. There was no app to do the work for you. Mistakes meant overdraft fees, bounced checks, and embarrassment at the counter. Learning to balance a checkbook taught students discipline, responsibility, and attention to detail. Today, online banking makes the process automatic, but in the 1970s and 1980s, this was the only way to stay afloat. Students may have groaned over the repetitive math, but years later, many of them would admit the skill kept them out of financial trouble. It was not glamorous, but it was practical, and it made adulthood less daunting. Looking back, it feels like one of the most useful lessons schools ever gave. Believe it or not, some schools in the past had actual smoking areas, not just for staff, but for students too. You would walk past the gym and see a fenced-off spot with ashtrays, a few benches, and maybe even a trash can overflowing with cigarette butts. And yes, this was on school property. If you were in high school and of smoking age, whatever that meant at the time, you could light up during lunch or between classes. Staff had their own designated corner too, usually near the parking lot or behind the cafeteria. Sometimes teachers and students would smoke within a few yards of each other. It sounds surreal now, but it was all part of the culture. Smoking was seen as a stress reliever, even something social. Schools tried to contain the habit instead of ban it. But by the 1990s, health warnings and anti-smoking campaigns gained ground. Laws changed. Suddenly, it was not just about being old enough. It was about protecting the health of every student on campus. Smoking areas disappeared. The only thing left was the faint smell of tobacco in your coat sleeve. And maybe the memory of lighting up with your best friend before algebra. A habit like that might have felt cool then, but now? It is hard to imagine anything less welcome at a school. Before insulated bags and bendy ice packs, you had a metal lunchbox, and it said everything about you. In the 1970s, a lunchbox was more than a container. It was a bold, clunky rectangle of personality. Scooby-Doo? The $6 Million Man? Maybe Wonder Woman if you were one of the cool ones. And inside that heavy metal case was a matching thermos that clicked shut and could keep soup warm or spill milk everywhere depending on the day. Your mom might have packed you a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in wax paper, a bag of pretzels, and an apple so bruised it looked like it had seen combat. And that was lunch. But that box, oh, it took a beating. It rolled down staircases, got sat on, slammed into lockers, and was sometimes used as a substitute football. By the time you made it to spring, the paint was chipped, the character's face was half scratched off, and the thermos smelled permanently like tomato soup. But you kept it. Every lunch period was a lineup of pop culture on the cafeteria table, and heaven help the kid who showed up with just a brown bag. That was social exile. Those metal lunchboxes were noisy, dented, and always too small, but they carried our childhoods inside them, one squashed sandwich at a time. Fried chicken patties were introduced to American schools in the 1980s and quickly became a favorite due to their similarity to popular fast food. These patties are made from ground chicken mixed with spices, then breaded with flour and breadcrumbs to create a crispy outer layer. The frying process transforms these prepared patties into golden, crunchy delights with a juicy interior, typically served as sandwiches or with sides like fries. The method of preparing these patties is well suited to the high-volume requirements of school cafeterias, involving simple steps that can be executed quickly: mixing, forming, breading, and frying. This efficiency ensures that delicious hot meals can be served promptly, reducing wait times and maximizing student satisfaction during lunch breaks. Long before infant acetaminophen existed, mothers kept a small brown bottle of paregoric on the shelf beside the baby formula. It was a camphorated tincture of opium, containing morphine, anise oil, and benzoic acid, and it was sold without a prescription in pharmacies across the country. Doctors recommended it for teething pain, infant colic, diarrhea, and fussy sleeping. The dosage instructions printed right on the label included infants as young as 5 days old. A single ounce contained roughly 13 milligrams of morphine. Parents rubbed it on swollen gums, mixed it into bottles, and spooned it directly into tiny mouths without a second thought, because their own pediatrician had told them to. It took until 1970 for the federal government to reclassify paregoric under the Controlled Substances Act, finally requiring a prescription. By then, generations of American babies had been dosed with opium before they could walk. Before 1975, not a single electrical outlet in your bathroom was required to have ground fault circuit interrupter protection. The outlets had 2 flat slots, no test button, no reset, and no ability to detect a lethal current leak. If a plugged-in hairdryer fell into a filled bathtub, nothing stood between the electricity and the person sitting in it. A study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association documented at least 95 bathtub electrocution deaths in the United States between 1979 and 1982. Hairdryers were responsible for 60% of those deaths, and kids under 5 had the highest mortality rate. The National Electrical Code did not mandate GFCI outlets in bathrooms until its 1975 edition, and many local jurisdictions took years to adopt the standard. The Electrical Safety Foundation later estimated that GFCI technology cut home electrocution deaths in half. Lawn darts were the kind of toy that made parents nervous for good reason. Marketed as a fun family game, they were basically long, heavy darts with pointed metal tips that you tossed into the air toward plastic rings on the ground. The idea was simple: hit the target, score a point, celebrate. The reality, though, was far from safe. Those darts could come down like miniature spears, embedding themselves in lawns, decks, and sometimes people. Families loved playing them at barbecues and backyard gatherings, and most assumed nothing bad could happen, until it did. Hospitals began reporting cases of serious head injuries and even deaths. In one tragic instance, a young boy was struck in the skull, leading to the nationwide outcry that finally got the toy pulled from shelves. Despite being banned, many households kept their sets hidden away, unable to part with the nostalgia. Looking back, it is almost unbelievable that something so lethal was once sold as harmless fun. It was a symbol of a fearless decade when danger and excitement often came in the same package. Sulfite-sprayed fresh produce was one of those invisible grocery store tricks that kept salad bars, fruit displays, and vegetable sections looking impossibly fresh throughout the 1980s. Stores misted sulfites onto lettuce, grapes, potatoes, and sliced apples to prevent browning and wilting. Shoppers had no idea they were eating a preservative with every bite because nothing on the bins warned them about what had been sprayed. The produce simply looked better and sold faster, which made everyone happy until it did not. People with asthma or sulfite sensitivities began experiencing severe reactions, and some turned fatal. Emergency rooms reported cases of people collapsing after eating restaurant salads, struggling to breathe as their airways closed without warning. Investigators traced the cause back to sulfites, and the pattern became impossible to ignore. Regulators moved quickly, banning sulfites on raw fruits and vegetables and requiring labels on processed foods that still contained them. Grocery stores scrambled to change their preservation methods, and the perfectly fresh displays that once seemed appealing suddenly looked suspicious to shoppers who finally understood what kept them that way. Lawn darts were 12 inches long, tipped with weighted steel points, and sold right next to the badminton sets at Sears. Families tossed them skyward at backyard barbecues, aiming for plastic rings on the grass, while kids ran through the yard underneath. Between 1980 and 1988, over 6,000 Americans visited emergency rooms because of lawn dart injuries. 81% of them were 15 or younger. In April of 1987, 7-year-old Michelle Snow was playing with dolls in her front yard in Riverside, California, when a dart thrown by a neighbor's child sailed over the backyard fence and struck her in the skull with an estimated 23,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. She was pronounced dead 3 days later. Her father, David, an aerospace engineer at Hughes Aircraft, spent the next year lobbying Congress and the Consumer Product Safety Commission. The CPSC banned all metal-tipped lawn darts in December of 1988, the week before Christmas. The swings at your neighborhood park were not the molded rubber seat, limited arc models that exist today. In the 1970s, a swing set meant a heavy steel A-frame bolted into concrete footings, with thick steel chains suspending either a flat wooden plank or a rigid rubber belt. The chains alone could pinch skin or catch hair if you shifted wrong at the peak of the arc. The connection points were open gaps wide enough to trap a small finger. Closed S-hook hardware was not standard. Getting clipped by an empty swing returning on its arc was like being struck by a steel-framed pendulum, because that is exactly what it was. Kids routinely stood on the seats, twisted the chains into tight spirals and released them to spin, or jumped at full height to see who could stick the landing. The ground below was bare dirt or concrete. Nobody measured the arc radius, and nobody posted weight limits. Gym teachers in the 1980s had a name for dodgeball that told you everything about how it was played. They called it murder ball. Two teams lined up on opposite sides of the gymnasium, and the rubber balls between them were not the soft foam versions sold today. They were hard, dense, and designed for kickball, with a surface that left raised welts on bare skin and enough weight to turn a close-range throw into something closer to assault. Hit someone, they sat down. Get hit, your dignity went with you. In 2013, the Journal of Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance inducted dodgeball into its Hall of Shame, alongside Red Rover and the rope climb. But the original version was worse. A 1922 guide published by Junior ROTC described a variation where the outer team threw medicine balls, weighing 7 to 12 pounds, at kids trapped in the center of the circle. In the 1970s, teenage pregnancy was not seen as a challenge to support. It was a problem to remove. Pregnant students were often forced out of school, told they would set a bad example. Some were sent to secret special schools, while others simply disappeared from classrooms one day. Administrators claimed it was to protect the school's reputation, not the students' future. Friends would whisper, teachers would avoid the subject, and an entire chapter of a young woman's life would be erased under the word shame. These girls were denied the right to graduate alongside their classmates or to continue their studies at all. The idea that motherhood and education could coexist was unthinkable to many at the time. It was a cold reflection of how society valued appearances more than compassion. Looking back, this rule did more than hide pregnancies. It hid humanity. Pink slime meat fillers in ground beef were one of the cafeteria secrets that nobody talked about because nobody even knew they existed. The hamburgers and taco meat that children ate throughout the 1980s contained something called lean, finely textured beef, a product made from scraps and trimmings spun in centrifuges and treated with ammonia to kill bacteria. It stretched the meat supply, lowered costs, and allowed schools to serve more students with smaller budgets. Kids bit into burgers believing they were eating real ground beef, never imagining that a portion came from processed leftovers that barely resembled meat. The texture blended in perfectly, masked by ketchup, mustard, and whatever else children piled on top. For years, this filler moved through school kitchens without question. But when journalists and food safety advocates exposed the practice, the public reaction was fierce. Parents demanded transparency, regulators tightened requirements, and pink slime was eventually banned from school cafeterias nationwide. Today, ground beef served to students must meet stricter standards that leave no room for the mystery fillers that once stretched every serving. Sewing on a button was one of those small but essential lessons. Teachers brought in shirts and scraps of fabric, handed out needles and thread, and showed students how to loop, stitch, and secure a loose button. The process was simple, but it required care. Tight enough to hold, loose enough to move. A missing button could make the difference between tossing a shirt and wearing it for years. Sewing on a button was never about fashion. It was about resourcefulness. It taught patience, fine motor skills, and the idea that you did not throw things away at the first sign of wear. Today, clothes are cheap and easy to replace, but back then, families stretched every garment as far as it would go. Home economics gave kids the confidence to fix what was broken instead of discarding it. The lesson was not flashy, but it was empowering. Proof that even a teenager could keep their wardrobe intact with a few stitches. Looking back, it is remarkable how such a small skill carried so much weight. Let's talk about the absolute battlefield that was dodgeball in gym class. You walked into the gym, they tossed out some red rubber balls, and it was every kid for themselves. No teams, no rules, just chaos. The balls? Hard. Like, leave a mark on your face hard. Getting hit was not just painful, it was personal. Kids would wind up like major league pitchers and aim for heads. There was no padding, no safety rules. No one stepped in when someone got hit square in the nose. And teachers just stood there, maybe sipping their coffee, acting like this was completely normal. You could get a concussion and still be told to walk it off. Eventually, enough parents complained. Enough kids left gym class with bruises and busted lips. Dodgeball became regulated. Softer foam balls replaced the rubber ones. Some schools banned the game altogether, but if you were there during its lawless golden age, you remember the sound that ball made when it connected, that echo, that chaos, and the one unspoken rule: do not turn your back because someone would take the shot. You knew it was going to be a good day when the lights went out and the film strip projector came out. That low whir, the faint hum, and the little beep that told the teacher it was time to click to the next slide. Beep, click, and again, beep, click. In the 1970s, these things were everywhere in schools. Educational videos were not on YouTube. They were printed on transparent frames and wound into a reel like some old Hollywood mystery. The narrator always sounded like he was reading out of a phone book, and the animations were, well, let's just say, budget-friendly. But you still loved every second, because it meant no notes, no tests, just sitting back and hoping the teacher forgot the lights were off. Every class had that one projector that only half worked. The lens was always dusty. The bulb would burn out mid-lesson. Sometimes it was backwards or upside down. But you watched anyway. Whether it was about how plants grow, the water cycle, or some animated duck teaching math, the film strip was a golden break from routine. It turned classrooms into tiny theaters. It turned teachers into projectionists. And it turned students into slack-jawed kids staring at a flickering wall, completely content. Boiled hot dogs have been a long-standing favorite in American school cafeterias, known for their simple, tasty, and quick preparation. Made from a blend of beef and pork, these hot dogs are seasoned and boiled, served in a soft bun with a variety of condiments like ketchup, mustard, and relish. This cooking method is particularly effective in school environments as it allows for hot dogs to be prepared en masse and kept warm. The simplicity of boiled hot dogs makes them a reliable choice for school cafeterias, where the lunch period is often brief and the demand for quick service is high. Additionally, the familiarity and ease of customization of hot dogs meet diverse student preferences, making them a popular and comforting choice. This meal option not only satisfies hunger swiftly, but also aligns with the logistical needs of serving hundreds of students. Your mother's obstetrician may have told her to smoke. That is not an exaggeration. Throughout the 1960s, doctors advised pregnant women that a cigarette could calm their nerves, ease nausea, and help control excessive weight gain. Tobacco companies ran advertisements featuring physicians in white coats endorsing specific brands, and medical journals accepted full-page ads from cigarette manufacturers without hesitation. The 1964 Surgeon General's report linked smoking to lung cancer, but said almost nothing about pregnancy. Hospitals had ashtrays in maternity wards. Nurses smoked at their stations. Millions of women smoked through all 9 months because the person they trusted most, their doctor, never told them to stop. Every copper pipe joint in a 1970s bathroom was sealed with solder that contained up to 50% lead by weight. The plumber melted it with a torch, smoothed it with a rag, and moved to the next fitting. That solder sat in direct contact with the water flowing to your sink, your bathtub, and your shower head, leaching lead into every drop that passed through. Hot water accelerated the process, which meant the shower and the bath were the worst exposure points in the house. For children, even low concentrations of lead in water were linked to developmental delays, learning disabilities, and behavioral problems. Congress did not ban lead solder in residential plumbing until 1986 through an amendment to the Safe Drinking Water Act. Even then, the law defined lead-free as up to 8% lead content in fittings. That threshold was not reduced to 0.25% until 2011. For over a decade after the ban, the plumbing industry was still allowed to install fittings that leached lead into your family's water. The Battlestar Galactica missile-firing action figures were supposed to be every young sci-fi fan's dream come true. The toy line mirrored the excitement of the television show, with detailed spaceships and figures that could actually shoot small plastic missiles. Kids loved the realism, until that realism turned deadly. The missiles were small enough to fit into a child's mouth, and tragically, one boy choked to death after accidentally inhaling a projectile. That single event led to a massive recall and a permanent change in toy safety design. From that moment on, most manufacturers removed missile-launching features or made projectiles too large to swallow. At the time, though, parents were outraged that something marketed as safe had taken such a dark turn. The figures themselves became infamous collector's items, frozen in history as a symbol of the industry's recklessness. What started as a celebration of science fiction imagination ended with a harsh reality check about just how dangerous realistic play could become. Cyclamate-sweetened diet products lined grocery shelves throughout the early part of the decade, promising guilt-free sweetness to anyone watching their weight or managing diabetes. These artificial sweeteners appeared in diet sodas, sugar-free candies, and countless processed foods marketed as healthier alternatives. Families embraced them enthusiastically, believing science had solved the problem of enjoying sweetness without consequences. Dieters stirred cyclamate into coffee. Parents gave children sugar-free treats, and the country seemed convinced that artificial meant better. But cyclamate had been banned in 1969 after studies linked it to bladder cancer in animals, yet products containing it continued circulating through international markets into the 80s. The confusion over what was legal and what was still sitting in pantries created anxiety that lingered for years. People questioned every diet product they had consumed, wondering whether the calories saved were worth the risks taken. The cyclamate scare became one of the first major warnings that artificial ingredients were not automatically safer than natural ones, changing how regulators and consumers approached sweeteners forever. On summer evenings across rural America, pickup trucks rolled down two-lane highways with half a dozen kids bouncing around in the open bed, legs dangling over the tailgate. No one questioned it. It was how you got to the swimming hole or your cousin's house 3 towns over. There were no federal restrictions, and most states had no laws against it until the late 1990s. The bed of a pickup offered no restraints, no roll protection, and nothing between a child and the pavement at 55 miles per hour. A sudden stop could send every passenger airborne. What makes this one unsettling is that it still has no comprehensive federal ban. Several states still allow kids to ride in open truck beds, with restrictions varying so wildly that crossing a state line can turn a family outing into a child endangerment charge. In the 1970s, a child knocking on strangers' doors with a box of candy or a stack of greeting cards was as ordinary as seeing kids ride bikes at dusk. Schools, clubs, and neighborhood groups encouraged it, and parents saw no issue with sending their child out alone with nothing but a hopeful smile and a handwritten list of prices. Many kids went block to block, practicing their best sales pitch while walking through unfamiliar streets without any adult nearby. It was not a question of danger, it was a question of character building. Adults believed that selling door-to-door taught confidence, independence, and social courage. If a stranger invited a child inside to count change or look for a checkbook, no one panicked. It was simply how community life worked. Kids learned to manage money, carry product boxes, and keep track of their sales, often staying out until the porch lights flicked on. Today, the idea of sending a child unsupervised into the homes of unknown adults is considered unthinkable. Modern child safety laws stress controlled environments, adult chaperones, and strict rules about interactions with strangers. Door-to-door sales for minors now require supervision, permission forms, and sometimes even background-checked adults. What was once celebrated as a sign of trust in the community is now classified as a risk that society is unwilling to accept. Before the CPSC ever published a height guideline, jungle gyms in American schoolyards regularly reached 12 feet or higher. Some catalog models from companies like Narragansett Machine Company topped 14. The bars were tubular steel, cold and slick from morning dew or rain, and the spacing between rungs was not standardized. A small child's foot or head could slip through gaps that were never tested for entrapment. A study published in the Journal of Accident Analysis and Prevention found that kids were twice as likely to sustain serious injuries when falling from heights above 5 feet. The average 1970s jungle gym exceeded that threshold by a factor of 2. There was no safety netting, no enclosed platform at the top, and the landing zone was whatever surface the school happened to have, usually asphalt or packed earth with no cushioning properties whatsoever. When a glass thermometer broke in a 1980s science classroom, the lesson stopped and something far more interesting began. Mercury scattered across the lab table in tiny silver beads that rolled and merged when you pushed them together. Students poked the liquid metal with pencils, corralled it with index cards, and sometimes cupped it in the palms of their hands. Teachers treated it as a minor inconvenience. Someone wiped the table with a paper towel and class resumed. What nobody mentioned was that mercury vaporizes at room temperature into an invisible, odorless gas that accumulates in enclosed spaces. Between 2002 and 2006, American poison control centers received over 37,000 calls about children exposed to mercury, and more than 30,000 of those involved broken thermometers. A 2004 case in New Jersey found roughly 100 children exposed at a daycare center built inside a former thermometer factory. Fashion was rebellion in the 1970s, And for girls, something as simple as wearing pants could get them sent home. Many schools enforced strict dress codes requiring dresses or skirts below the knee. Jeans, slacks, or anything resembling male clothing were banned in the name of modesty. A girl wearing pants was often called disrespectful, even immoral. Yet it was also an era when women were fighting for equal rights outside the classroom, and school dress codes became a quiet battleground for that same fight. Some girls refused to change, others were suspended, and a few made local headlines for challenging the rules. When these codes finally started to fall away, it was not because schools suddenly became modern. It was because students refused to back down. What was once labeled inappropriate became a symbol of progress. Unlimited salt shakers on cafeteria tables were as common as napkin dispensers, sitting within arm's reach of every student who wanted to season their food without restriction. Kids grabbed them instinctively, shaking white crystals across mashed potatoes, green beans, and anything else that seemed too bland. No one monitored how much sodium poured out, and no one worried about health consequences hiding in each generous shake. It felt like freedom, like being trusted to make your own choices about how food should taste. Some children turned it into a game, competing to see who could pile the most salt onto a single tray. Lunch aides rarely intervened because seasoning food seemed harmless compared to other mischief students could cause. But those tiny shakers added up. When health researchers began connecting childhood sodium intake to long-term blood pressure problems, school nutrition guidelines changed dramatically. Salt shakers were pulled from tables, and kitchens were required to prepare foods within strict sodium limits. Today, giving students unlimited access to salt seems almost reckless, a relic of an era that trusted children with choices we now understand were never truly safe. Meal planning on a budget was a survival skill wrapped into a classroom assignment. Students were told to imagine feeding a family of 4 for a week with a limited amount of money. Out came grocery flyers, blank charts, and calculators. Teachers guided kids through the realities of choosing beans over steak, potatoes over convenience foods, and stretching leftovers into new meals. It was a practical math lesson disguised as cooking, showing how every dollar could be stretched if you thought ahead. Students learned to look for sales, compare prices by ounce, and balance nutrition with cost. Today, meal planning often means scrolling through apps or ordering meal kits, but back then, it was about survival and strategy. Home economics turned abstract numbers into dinner on the table, giving students a glimpse of real adulthood. Looking back, it is striking how much confidence this skill gave kids who grew up to run households of their own. Yes, it actually happened. Teachers used to smoke during class, inside the building, at their desks, in front of students. There was no teacher's lounge break. They would just light up mid-lecture and keep going. Some of them even had ashtrays right on top of the grade book. The smoke would curl into the air while you tried to focus on long division or vocabulary words. It was like sitting in a low-budget jazz club, but with less music and more math. The worst part? No one even seemed to mind. It was just what adults did. And kids, who obviously could not smoke, sat there breathing in secondhand fumes. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, health officials started cracking down. Smoking was banned indoors. Teachers were told to take it outside. And slowly, the classroom ashtray became a relic of the past. Now, the idea of lighting a cigarette around children is unthinkable. But if you ever had to squint through a cloud of Marlboro smoke to see the chalkboard, you know this was real, and maybe a little horrifying. Now this was elite. If you had one of the early trapper keepers in the 1970s, you were operating on a different level. Forget loose folders or rubber bands. The trapper keeper was the Cadillac of school supplies. It clicked shut with that unmistakable Velcro sound, opened like a command center, and held every paper, worksheet, and secret note you owned. Some had rainbow gradients, some had race cars, others had geometric chaos that looked straight out of a disco. The binder rings snapped into place with authority. You had folders labeled for every class, and you felt like you had your life together, even if you definitely did not. Teachers both loved and hated them. Loved the organization, hated the distractions. Because, let's be honest, you spent more time decorating it with stickers and doodling hearts on the inside than actually using it. Still, there was something empowering about clicking that cover shut and slamming it on your desk. Like you were saying, yeah, I am ready to learn. Even if you just spent the whole class playing MASH in the margins. Trapper Keepers were not just stationery, they were identity. They told people who you were, or at least who you wanted to be. Tater tots were born out of innovation in 1953 by the founders of Ida Golden and Francis Neefy Grigg. Utilizing leftover potato scraps from their French fry production, they created a new snack by chopping these remnants finely, mixing them with flour and seasonings, and forming them into small cylinders before deep frying them to a golden crisp. This process not only provided an efficient solution to food waste, but also produced a snack that was perfectly crispy on the outside while remaining fluffy inside. Tater tots are particularly popular as a side dish, but can also feature in recipes like casseroles, making them a versatile component of school lunches. The method of preparing tater tots involves deep frying, which, while requiring careful temperature control to achieve the perfect crunch without burning, fits well within the capabilities of large kitchen operations in schools. In 1960, the FDA approved Obitrol, a capsule containing a mixture of amphetamine salts, including methamphetamine, as a prescription treatment for obesity. Doctors handed it to housewives the way they handed out aspirin. But the real madness was the rainbow pills. Patients walked into specialized obesity clinics and left with a personalized cocktail of brightly colored capsules, amphetamines to kill the appetite, thyroid hormone to accelerate metabolism, digitalis to increase heart rate, barbiturates to offset the jitters, and laxatives to flush everything through. One dispensing diet doctor paid $71 for 100,000 amphetamine tablets and sold them for $12,000. By 1962, American pharmaceutical companies were producing 8 billion amphetamine tablets per year. The weight came off. So did years of cardiac health. The Controlled Substances Act of 1971 finally slowed the pipeline, but not before an entire generation of women had been chemically wired to a scale. If your home was built before the 1970s, there was a narrow slot on the back wall of the medicine cabinet, just wide enough to slide a used razor blade through. The blade dropped into the wall cavity and was never seen again. No collection box, no sealed container, no removal mechanism. The blades fell between the studs and piled up for decades. Renovation contractors who opened bathroom walls in older homes routinely found hundreds of rusted blades stacked in loose piles behind the plaster, some still sharp enough to cut through a work glove. No regulation required the slots to be sealed. No code addressed what happened to the blades once they disappeared. The practice faded as disposable cartridge razors replaced double-edged safety blades, but the walls of older American homes still hold the evidence. Clackers were one of those toys that seemed harmless until you actually used them. 2 acrylic balls were attached to strings, and the goal was to swing them up and down in rhythm so they smacked together with a loud clack. Kids loved the sound and the challenge, spending hours perfecting the timing. Sometimes they would form small groups on driveways or at recess, each trying to master double or triple clacks while the others watched in awe. The plastic would heat from friction, adding an odd smell and a bit of smoke to the mix. But no one cared. It felt like an accomplishment. Even when their hands were sore and their wrists bruised, they kept going, determined to get that perfect sound. But anyone who owned a set knows what came next. Those plastic balls were made of hard, brittle material that could shatter under pressure. When they did, the pieces flew fast and sharp, right into faces, eyes, or walls. Parents tried to tape them up or replace them, but the danger was baked into the design. Eventually, schools and parents' groups began pushing for bans after a wave of injuries swept the country. Still, for many who grew up then, that loud rhythmic clicking brings back memories of hot summer afternoons and bruised knuckles. They were flashy, fun, and far too dangerous to survive the modern world. Lead-soldered canned goods sat in pantries across the country throughout the 1980s, holding everything from vegetables and soups to fruits and baby formula. The seams holding these cans together were sealed with lead solder, standard practice for decades because lead was cheap and created airtight seals. Families stacked these cans in cupboards, trusting that the contents were safe because canned food was supposed to last without spoiling. But lead does not stay locked in metal. It slowly leaches into food inside, especially when contents are acidic like tomatoes or citrus juices. Children were particularly vulnerable because their bodies absorbed lead more easily, and even small amounts could affect brain development and learning. Researchers began connecting childhood lead exposure to canned foods, and the findings were alarming enough to force regulatory action. The ban on lead solder in food cans came swiftly once evidence became undeniable, but millions of families had already consumed decades' worth of contaminated meals without ever knowing. Those old cans became symbols of an era when convenience sometimes came with invisible costs no one expected. But the dangers were not limited to the road. They followed your kids right through the front door, because in the 1980s, millions of American kids came home from school every afternoon to an empty house. They were called latchkey kids, named for the house key strung around their necks on a shoelace, and by the mid-1980s, the term described an estimated 7 million children under the age of 13. A 1984 documentary called them day orphans. Their parents were not negligent. They were working, often 2 jobs, in an economy that offered almost no affordable after-school care. But a 6-year-old heating soup on a gas stove, answering the door to strangers, and managing household emergencies alone for 3 or 4 hours every afternoon was considered perfectly normal. Illinois now sets the minimum age for leaving a child home alone at 14. In the 1980s, most states had no minimum at all. Building a treehouse in the 1970s was one of the purest childhood adventures. You gathered whatever boards you could find, borrowed nails from your father's toolbox, and climbed the nearest sturdy tree without taking a single moment to check for stability. Kids balanced on branches, hammered crooked planks into place, and made ladders out of anything long enough to lean against the trunk. No blueprints, no measurements, no adult inspector watching over the project. The entire point was the freedom to create something dangerously charming. Many tree houses leaned in odd directions or wobbled with every step, yet that only added to the pride kids felt when inviting friends over to climb inside parents rarely supervised because they believed children needed to learn problem-solving, teamwork, and bravery the hard way. A splinter was a badge of honor, and a tumble from a branch was considered a learning experience rather than a crisis. Today, however, building a tree house with scrap wood and little oversight would break multiple safety guidelines. Modern standards require adult supervision, protective gear, and stable materials because unstable structures are considered a significant risk. Schools, insurers, and city codes now restrict elevated play structures without proper design. The once beloved childhood tradition of building your own high-rise hideout has been transformed into a regulated activity that demands caution instead of creativity. But while the jungle gym at least stayed in place, the merry-go-round was a hazard that moved. The standard playground model of the 1970s was a flat steel platform, sometimes 10 to 16 feet in diameter, mounted on a center post and spun entirely by hand. There were no speed governors, no braking mechanisms, and no limit on how fast older kids or adults could push the thing. Miracle Recreation Equipment Company of Grinnell, Iowa, one of the largest playground manufacturers in the country, sold merry-go-rounds by the thousands. The CPSC later sued Miracle for its bounce-around whirl and buckaroo whirl models after discovering that the rotating platform crossed over stationary supports with extremely narrow clearance, creating a shearing mechanism that could trap and crush small fingers. Miracle had received numerous injury claims but failed to report them as required by the Consumer Product Safety Act. The company only disclosed the defect after a federal inspection forced the issue. Before anyone worried about what kids were breathing in science class, some schools had already solved a different problem by giving students a dedicated place to inhale something worse. If you attended high school in the early 1980s, your campus may have had a designated smoking area where students could light a cigarette between classes without fear of detention. At Cheyenne East High in Wyoming, The class of 1983 remembered multiple spots, including a courtyard by the cafeteria and a path from the boys' locker room to the parking lot. In Minnesota, one district installed a school-sanctioned smoking bathroom, reasoning it was better to contain the habit than let students destroy every lavatory in the building. Most of these smokers were 14 to 18 years old. By September of 1981, districts started reversing course, stationing police near campuses to ticket underage smokers. For years before that, lighting up at school was not rebellion, it was infrastructure. Hair became another target of control, especially for boys. If your hair touched your collar or ears, you risked suspension or public humiliation. Principals would walk the halls with rulers, checking length against the dress code. Long hair was seen as a threat, a sign of rebellion, nonconformity, or even moral weakness. Some schools kept scissors in the office to fix violations on the spot. For many students, hair became a quiet protest against authority, a way to express individuality when few other options existed. Parents argued with schools, but change came slowly. The hair wars of the 1970s were about more than style. They were about identity, freedom, and the right to be different in a system built to make everyone the same. Full sugar chocolate pudding cups were the crown jewels of the cafeteria dessert section, small plastic containers filled with smooth sweetness that made even the worst lunch days feel survivable. Kids peeled back the foil lids with anticipation, sometimes licking them clean before diving into the pudding with plastic spoons that bent under the pressure of eager scooping. The chocolate flavor was intense and unapologetically sweet, the kind of dessert that coated your tongue and lingered long after the last bite. Schools offered them freely, sometimes encouraging seconds for students who finished their main courses. Parents saw pudding as a harmless treat, something that made children happy without causing obvious harm. But those little cups contained far more sugar than anyone realized, packed into servings that exceeded what modern nutritionists consider safe for a single meal. When federal guidelines began restricting added sugars in school meals, chocolate pudding cups became one of the first casualties. The versions available today are reformulated with artificial sweeteners or reduced sugar content that changes the taste entirely. For anyone who remembers the original, the difference is clear. Using a sewing machine was an initiation into the world of hands-on creativity. Students learned to thread the bobbin, guide fabric under the needle, and keep their seams straight. Teachers assigned projects like aprons, skirts, or pillowcases, grading not just the finished product but also the effort. The hum of sewing machines filled classrooms, a chorus of clattering needles and nervous students concentrating on every stitch. Mistakes meant tangled thread or crooked hems, but those errors were part of the learning process. The satisfaction of finishing a project, no matter how uneven the stitches, gave students a sense of pride. It showed them that effort and persistence could turn fabric scraps into something useful and lasting. Beyond making something wearable, the lesson taught self-sufficiency. Students realized they could create, alter, or repair items without ever stepping into a store. In today's throwaway culture, the skill feels almost revolutionary. Back then, it was simply another part of preparing for adulthood, a reminder that every stitch had value. Looking back, it is clear how much confidence came from being able to make something with your own hands. This one feels almost like a cartoon, but it was real. If you messed up in class, especially in earlier decades, teachers might march you to the front of the room, plop a tall, cone-shaped dunce cap on your head, and make you sit in the corner, in front of everyone. The cap usually had the word dunce written across it in big, bold letters, and the goal was not correction, it was humiliation. You were basically put on display as the class failure. For some kids, it only made things worse. They would act out more or stop trying entirely. Teachers thought it was a way to motivate, but it usually just created shame and resentment. Eventually, educators realized there were better ways to handle mistakes. The dunce cap was removed. So was the corner. And slowly, the practice faded into legend. Now, the only place you will see a dunce cap is in an old comic strip or a vintage photograph. But for the kids who had to wear it, it is not something they laugh about. It is something they never forgot. This one hits hard. Story time with a record player was a full event in the 1970s classroom. The lights would dim just a little, the teacher would carefully place a giant vinyl record on the turntable, and you would hear that faint crackle as the needle dropped. The voice would come in, calm and theatrical. When you hear the chime, turn the page. That chime? Magic. Goosebumps every time. These stories were not just being told, they were being performed, with background music, sound effects, and perfect pacing. The class would sit in a soft silence, some kids closing their eyes, others watching the teacher turn the pages of the giant picture book up front. You might not have remembered the story itself, but you remembered how it made you feel. Safe, still, completely there. The record player would sometimes skip or drag, but that just made it more real. It was tactile, it was shared, and it beat spelling tests any day of the week. Story records were the lullaby of the school day, a rare, slow moment where the classroom felt more like home. Sloppy Joes have been a staple in American school cafeterias since their introduction in the mid-20th century. This dish features ground beef or pork that is sautéed with onions and garlic until browned, then simmered in a savory tomato-based sauce seasoned with Worcestershire sauce and other spices. The thick, hearty mixture is then spooned onto soft hamburger buns, creating a filling and flavorful sandwich that is both messy and delightful to eat. The preparation requires minimal kitchen equipment and ingredients that are staples in most school pantries, making it a cost-effective choice for feeding a large number of students. Moreover, the ability to prepare the meat mixture ahead of time and quickly assemble the sandwiches during busy lunch periods enhances its practicality. The familiarity of the flavors, combined with the satisfying nature of the sandwich, ensures that Sloppy Joes remain a cherished option within school meal programs. If the diet pills kept you wired during the day, the barbiturates were supposed to bring you down at night. Phenobarbital was the drug your family doctor prescribed for everything that could not be diagnosed: exam anxiety, wedding day nerves, a rough patch in a marriage, trouble sleeping after a move. It was a powerful central nervous system depressant, a drug now classified as a Schedule IV controlled substance and reserved almost exclusively for epilepsy treatment. But in the 1960s, a general practitioner could write you a prescription in under 2 minutes and send you home with a bottle of 60 tablets. The therapeutic dose and the lethal dose were not far apart, and mixing phenobarbital with alcohol, which millions of Americans did every evening, narrowed that gap to almost nothing. Overdose deaths were so common, they barely made the local papers. The danger in a 1970s bathroom was not just behind the walls, it was under your bare feet. Vinyl floor tiles manufactured by Armstrong, Kentile, and Flint Coat contained asbestos fibers mixed directly into the material for durability and heat resistance. They were installed in millions of bathrooms from the 1920s through the late 70s, and the black mastic adhesive used to glue them down also contained asbestos. As long as the tiles stayed intact, the fibers remained trapped. But bathroom floors take constant abuse. Moisture warps the edges, foot traffic cracks the surface, and when a tile chipped or broke, microscopic asbestos fibers became airborne in a small enclosed room with poor ventilation. The EPA began restricting asbestos in the late 1970s, but tiles already installed were never required to be removed. Every bathroom renovation in an older home carried the risk of releasing a known carcinogen into the lungs of whoever was standing nearby with a scraper in hand. The Easy Bake Oven of the 1980s felt like pure independence in a box. With a tiny light bulb acting as the heat source, kids could bake small cakes and cookies all by themselves. It was marketed as a way to feel grown up, and it worked, maybe too well. Many kids used the oven to experiment, tossing in candy bars, crayons, or whatever was in the pantry, just to see what would happen. The smell that filled the room was equal parts sugar and smoke, and parents would come running only to find melted chaos inside. Some kids even charged friends a few cents to taste test their creations, proudly serving up burned chocolate and half-cooked dough. The problem was, those little ovens could get dangerously hot. Thousands of children burned their fingers or hands trying to pull out the metal pans, and some even ended up with serious blisters. There were no automatic shutoffs, and the compact design trapped heat in ways no one expected. Parents quickly realized the toy was more hazard than hobby. Later versions introduced safety doors and cooler heating elements, but by then, the damage to its reputation was done. The 1980s model still holds a nostalgic place in many hearts, but it also taught an entire generation a hard lesson. Sometimes being just like mom comes with a price. Unpasteurized raw milk was still available in many grocery stores during the 1980s, sitting in refrigerated sections alongside pasteurized cartons. Some shoppers specifically sought it out, believing it was healthier, more natural, and closer to what their grandparents drank straight from the farm. The creamy texture, richer taste, and idea that nothing had been processed made raw milk feel wholesome in a way modern dairy did not. Parents poured it over cereal, blended it into smoothies, and gave it to children who had no idea they were drinking something potentially dangerous. But unpasteurized milk can carry bacteria, including Salmonella, E. coli, and Listeria, pathogens that pasteurization was specifically designed to kill. Outbreaks traced back to raw milk sickened families across the country, and some cases turned severe or even fatal. Regulators responded by tightening restrictions until raw milk became illegal in most grocery stores nationwide. Today, finding it requires visiting farms directly or navigating complex state laws, a far cry from when it sat casually on refrigerator shelves waiting for anyone to take it home. The cigarette smoke was everywhere. It drifted through living rooms, filled up station wagons with the windows rolled up, and hung in a blue-gray haze above the dinner table. In the 1980s, over 30% of American adults smoked, and the concept of protecting kids from secondhand exposure barely existed. The Surgeon General did not release a report addressing the dangers of involuntary smoking until 1986. Restaurants had smoking sections separated from families by nothing more than a 3-foot gap between tables. Pediatricians' waiting rooms had ashtrays. In 1988, Congress banned smoking on domestic flights shorter than 2 hours, but inside American homes, kids kept breathing it in. Government data from that year showed 88% of non-smokers, including millions of kids, had detectable levels of cotinine, a nicotine byproduct, in their blood. Back in the 70s, one of the greatest childhood thrills was standing between the front seats while your parents drove. Gripping the headrests like handlebars as the wind rushed through the cracked windows, kids loved the feeling of being tall, important, and directly involved in the journey. Some even leaned forward to help steer, placing tiny hands on the wheel while parents laughed and pretended it made a difference. There was no concept of car accidents happening in the blink of an eye. The world felt slower, safer, and strangely forgiving. Seatbelts were optional, and many families treated them like suggestions rather than rules. If the car braked too hard and a child tumbled backward into the back seat, everyone laughed instead of panicking. The front row was the throne, and kids naturally gravitated toward it. Parents believed it helped with bonding and connection during long drives, especially when the radio buzzed with static and conversation carried the miles. Today, child passenger laws prohibit this entirely because unrestrained children are at extreme risk during any sudden movement or collision. Modern guidelines require proper seats, harnesses, and locked positions far from airbags and impact zones. What once felt like a warm part of family road trips is now considered one of the most dangerous habits a parent could allow. The steel teeter-totter had a brutal design flaw built into its core purpose. Two kids sat on opposite ends of a steel plank balanced on a center fulcrum, and the only way it worked was if both riders cooperated. If one jumped off without warning, the other dropped straight down, and the steel plank slammed into the ground with full gravitational force plus the rider's weight. There was no shock absorber, no rubber bumper, and no cushion at the bottom of the arc. The impact point was typically a metal crossbar striking packed earth or concrete, and the child on top absorbed the entire jolt through the base of the spine. The fulcrum mechanism itself was a pinch point. Small fingers could get caught between the moving plank and the stationary support post. Most models also had steel handles that could crack a jaw if the rider pitched forward on a hard landing. The design went unchanged from the 1920s through the late 1970s. The metal slide at your school was a sheet of polished steel bolted to a frame standing 10 or 12 feet tall, anchored directly into concrete and completely exposed to the sun. By mid-afternoon in any state south of Ohio, that surface became a griddle. Temperatures on sun-baked steel could reach over 150 degrees, hot enough to cause contact burns on the backs of bare legs in seconds. Kids invented their own workarounds. They poured water down the chute, slid on wax paper stolen from lunchboxes, or simply launched themselves off the sides when the heat became unbearable. There were no plastic alternatives, no shade structures, and no heat-reducing coatings. The Consumer Product Safety Commission pushed for design changes, but most schools did not swap steel for molded plastic until the late 1990s. Believe it or not, smoking was part of school culture. Many high schools had official smoking areas outdoors, complete with benches and ashtrays. Teachers would supervise or even join in during breaks. It was considered normal, a way to relax between classes. Cigarette companies marketed heavily to teens, and schools did little to discourage it. The smell of tobacco hung in hallways, on clothes, even in gym lockers. Parents accepted it as a phase, unaware of the health risks we now take for granted. By the late 1970s, as public health campaigns grew, these smoking courts began to disappear. But for years, they stood as a reminder that even in a place meant for learning, bad habits were sanctioned by the system itself. White bread for every sandwich was the unspoken rule in school cafeterias throughout the 1980s. Soft slices that held together peanut butter, bologna, and whatever else lunch workers assembled each morning. The bread was pale, pillowy, and completely devoid of anything resembling whole grain nutrition. Kids loved it because it was familiar, the same bread their mothers used at home, the same texture they associated with comfort and normalcy. Nobody questioned whether refined flour was good for growing bodies because nobody thought about bread as anything other than a vehicle for fillings. Schools bought it in bulk because it was cheap, lasted long, and never drew complaints from picky eaters. The sandwiches stacked up on trays by the hundreds, wrapped in plastic or nestled in paper boats, waiting for hungry students who never imagined their bread choices mattered. But when nutrition science caught up with cafeteria menus, white bread became a symbol of everything wrong with school lunches. Federal mandates now require that at least half of all grains served in schools be whole grain rich, effectively banning the pure white bread that once dominated every lunch line. Laundry sorting was another ordinary but crucial skill. Students practiced separating whites, colors, and delicates, learning firsthand how a red sock could ruin a load of white shirts. Teachers explained water temperatures, fabric types, and detergents, emphasizing prevention over repair. Laundry sorting was about saving clothes, but it was also about saving money. Families could not afford to constantly replace ruined garments. It taught kids to pay attention to details, to pause before tossing everything into the machine. That small moment of care often saved hours of frustration and money later. The lesson was not glamorous, but it prepared students to take care of what they owned. Today, many households rely on machines with preset cycles and built-in safeguards, but accidents still happen. In the 1970s, sorting correctly meant the difference between fresh-looking clothes and a disaster. Home economics turned laundry into a science lesson, reminding kids that small habits make a big difference. Looking back, it is hard not to see the wisdom in teaching something so practical. Here is something that would absolutely make the news today: teachers throwing chalkboard erasers at students. And no, it was not a joke. If you were not paying attention or caught whispering too much, you could get an eraser flung right at your desk, sometimes at your head. And these were not soft foam blocks. They were solid felt and wood, caked in white chalk dust. Getting hit was not just embarrassing, it hurt. Some kids would duck instinctively when the teacher reached for the chalk. Others learned to sit still out of fear, not respect. It was not uncommon for dust to fly into someone's eyes, or for a student to be singled out just for looking bored. And while it was often played off as just a joke, it left more than just chalk marks behind. A lot of teachers saw it as a harmless way to keep order. Just a little nudge, they said. But kids were ducking like it was dodgeball round two. Some teachers even prided themselves on their aim. By the 1990s, this kind of discipline started facing real consequences. Schools banned physical gestures like that, and teachers were expected to use their words, not their throwing arm. Today, even raising your voice too much can land you in a meeting with the principal. But if you grew up dodging flying erasers, you know those classrooms had their own kind of tension. And you probably still flinch when you hear chalk hit the wall. The overhead projector was the crown jewel of classroom technology in the 1970s. It looked like a weird lamp from the future, but when the teacher rolled it in, you knew things were about to get serious. The clear transparency sheets, sometimes handwritten, sometimes printed, would be carefully laid on the glass. The light would shine up through it, reflect off the angled mirror, and bam! The wall turned into a giant worksheet. Teachers would use dry erase markers to underline, circle, and emphasize things like they were news anchors on live television. Sometimes they wrote too fast, sometimes they forgot to erase. And every once in a while, they'd block the light with their hand and accidentally cast a giant shadow that looked like a puppet show across the whiteboard. You always paid closer attention when the overhead came out, not because it was more interesting, but because it felt more official, like you were about to be hit with a pop quiz or a grammar rule that would follow you for the rest of your life. You could see the handwriting projected huge, right on the board. It was hard to ignore, hard to escape, but somehow you still kind of loved it. Fish sticks became part of the school lunch menu shortly after their commercial introduction in the 1950s. Made from white fish like cod or pollock, these sticks are cut into manageable pieces, breaded and then deep-fried or baked to create a crispy exterior with a tender and flaky interior. This preparation method not only makes fish sticks easy to eat, but also appealing to the palates of young students, who may otherwise be reluctant to consume fish. The breading, often seasoned with spices and herbs, adds a savory flavor that complements the mild taste of the fish, making it a popular choice in school cafeterias. Fish sticks are typically served with tartar sauce or ketchup and a side of vegetables, providing a balanced meal with proteins, carbs, and vitamins. Their ease of preparation, including the ability to cook them from frozen, aligns well with the needs of large-scale meal production typical in schools. Charcoal and Robitussin. AC sat on the same pharmacy shelf as Band-Aids and rubbing alcohol, and they did not require a prescription. These cherry-flavored cough syrups contained codeine, an opioid derived from the same poppy plant as morphine, blended with a generous pour of grain alcohol. When cold season hit a household, parents dosed the entire family from the same bottle, spooning it into children as young as 3 or 4 years old. The codeine suppressed the cough by acting directly on the brain's cough center, and the alcohol ensured that everyone slept deeply whether they needed to or not. Nobody called it what it was: an opioid sedative mixed with liquor, dispensed to minors without medical supervision. It was not until the late 1970s that the FDA began restricting codeine-containing cough preparations, and some formulations remained available without a prescription well into the 1990s. In the early 1970s, a residential water heater shipped with its thermostat preset to 140 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. No warning label on the unit, no anti-scald mixing valve on any faucet, and no industry standard suggesting a safer setting. At 140 degrees, a child's skin sustained a severe burn in 3 seconds. At 120, the same injury took 10 minutes. That 20-degree gap was the difference between a safe bath and a hospital visit, but nobody adjusted for it. The Consumer Product Safety Commission reported that tap water scalds hospitalized 1,500 Americans annually and killed roughly 100. 34% of scald burns in young kids happened in the bathroom. Washington State passed the first law requiring water heaters to be preset to 120 degrees in 1983. Manufacturers did not adopt a voluntary national standard until 1988. Slap bracelets were everywhere in the late 1980s. Classrooms, malls, playgrounds. Kids collected them by the dozen, showing off neon colors and wild patterns. The trick was simple. Snap the straight band against your wrist and watch it curl around perfectly. Some kids took it a step further, slapping them across backpacks, arms, and even faces in playful fights. The noise of a dozen bracelets snapping at once could fill an entire hallway, driving teachers insane. For a few glorious years, they were the ultimate symbol of rebellion, something that annoyed adults but made you instantly cool. But beneath that fabric lay a thin strip of sharp-edged metal. Over time, the covering wore down or tore, revealing the raw steel underneath. Soon, reports of cut wrists and sliced skin started pouring in. Some schools banned them outright, calling them distracting and dangerous. Still, the craze was unstoppable for a while. Every kid wanted to hear that satisfying snap, no matter how many warnings came from teachers or parents. They were the perfect mix of rebellion and style, a fashion statement that literally left its mark.
Brominated vegetable oil was quietly mixed into citrus-flavored sodas throughout the 1980s, keeping fruity flavoring evenly distributed instead of floating to the top. Families cracked open cans of orange, lemon lime, and grapefruit sodas without any idea that the same chemical used in flame retardants was swirling in their drinks. The ingredient worked so well that beverage companies relied on it for decades, adding it to sports drinks and fruit punches marketed to children and athletes. People consumed it at picnics, birthday parties, and everyday meals, never questioning why their drink stayed so perfectly blended. But bromine accumulates in the body over time, and researchers eventually linked it to thyroid problems and neurological issues that built up silently with every sip. When regulators announced a ban on brominated vegetable oil, the news shocked consumers who had never heard of the ingredient despite drinking it for years. Companies scrambled to reformulate recipes, and shoppers wondered what else might be hiding in the products they trusted without question. It became one more reminder that familiar labels can conceal unfamiliar dangers. The playground at your elementary school in 1982 was not designed with safety in mind. It was designed to survive weather. The monkey bars were welded steel pipe, rising 10 or 12 feet above packed dirt or cracked asphalt. The slides were bare metal that absorbed the summer sun until they could raise blisters on exposed skin. The merry-go-rounds were heavy iron platforms spinning fast enough to launch a child sideways, and the seesaws were wooden planks on steel fulcrums that could crack a jaw on the way down. In 1981, the Consumer Product Safety Commission published its first handbook for public playground safety after tracking thousands of emergency room visits. The CDC declared traditional monkey bars unsuitable for safe playgrounds in the early 1980s. 75% of all playground injuries resulted from falls onto inadequate surfaces. The equipment stayed in place at most schools for another decade. In the 1970s, teaching a child to shoot a BB gun or pellet gun was not just normal. It was practically expected. In many neighborhoods, parents saw these small air-powered guns as harmless tools for discipline, responsibility, and skill building. Kids set up targets made of tin cans, old bottles, and cardboard boxes, then spent afternoons practicing their aim with no adults watching from the porch. Safety goggles were almost non-existent, and instructions were often limited to simple advice like, "Do not shoot toward the house." For many kids, this was their introduction to independence, outdoorsmanship, and the thrill of being trusted with something that looked and felt like a real weapon. They learned to pump the gun, load the pellets, and fire repeatedly without anyone reminding them to be careful. Today, however, unsupervised use of BB guns is treated very differently. Many regions classify them as weapons requiring adult presence, secure storage, and strict oversight. Injuries from ricochets, eye damage, and accidental shootings pushed modern laws to restrict their use. What was once considered a harmless backyard pastime is now viewed as a high-risk activity that demands responsibility and supervision. Monkey bars were responsible for more serious injuries on public playgrounds than any other piece of equipment, according to CPSC data from the era, and the 1970s version was designed to maximize that risk. The overhead ladder was tubular steel mounted at a height that left the average second grader's feet 6 to 8 feet off the ground. The bars were smooth, round, and offered no grip texture. A sweaty palm on a summer afternoon meant a lost hold and a straight drop. The spacing between rungs was set for an adult stride but too wide for most kids under 8, which forced them to swing their full body weight to reach each bar. 3/4 of all playground injuries in the 1970s and 80s resulted from falls to the surface, and monkey bars generated more of those falls than any other single structure. No one installed padding below. No one lowered the height. No one asked whether a first grader should share the same equipment as a sixth grader. Near the ceiling of every school gym, a thick braided rope hung from a steel hook, dangling 20 or more feet above a single mat so thin you could feel the hardwood floor through it. The gym teacher blew a whistle, and one by one students were expected to climb. No harness, no second mat. The spotter was usually a classmate whose attention lasted about 4 seconds. In 2013, the rope climb was inducted into the Physical Education Hall of Shame, described as a perfect storm of low participation, extreme danger, thin mats, inattentive spotters, rope burns on hands and legs, and the grand spectacle of one student struggling while an entire class sat and watched. For the handful who reached the top, the reward was a view of ceiling dust and exposed ductwork. For everyone else, the reward was shredded palms and a grade that punished them for having short arms. Teachers lighting up inside classrooms sounds unbelievable today, but in the 1970s it was as common as chalk dust. Many teachers had ashtrays right on their desks and a lit cigarette balanced between their fingers while they lectured. Smoke curled around overhead projectors, and the air was thick by the end of the day. Students sat quietly, breathing it all in, not daring to complain. Some teachers even used cigarettes as part of their persona, the cool teacher with rolled-up sleeves and a cloud of smoke overhead. It symbolized authority and adulthood, not addiction. Looking back, it is astonishing how normalized it was to fill a room of children with secondhand smoke. What we now call dangerous was once seen as sophistication. The classroom might have been filled with lessons, but the air itself was toxic. Canned fruit swimming in heavy syrup was a cafeteria staple that made fruit feel like dessert, each spoonful glistening with sugary liquid that pooled at the bottom of the bowl. Peach halves, pear slices, and fruit cocktail arrived in industrial cans that lunch workers opened before portioning the contents into small dishes. The syrup was thick and sweet, the kind of liquid children instinctively drank after finishing the fruit itself. Schools served it proudly because it counted as a fruit serving, checking a nutritional box without requiring the expense of fresh produce. Parents assumed their children were eating something healthy because the word fruit appeared on the menu. But those heavy syrups contained enough added sugar to rival candy, turning what should have been a wholesome choice into something far less innocent. When regulators examined the sugar content hiding in school fruit servings, heavy syrup became an immediate target. Today, canned fruit in schools must be packed in water, natural juice, or light syrup containing a fraction of the sugar children once consumed without question. The fruit tastes different now, less like a treat and more like what it always should have been. Making and following a recipe card was a ritual of home economics. Teachers handed out handwritten cards, often faded from use, and students were expected to follow them step by step. Ingredients had to be measured by hand. Cups, spoons, and scales were all part of the process. Missing a step meant the dish failed, and there was no undo button to fix it. Recipe cards were lessons in precision and patience, teaching kids to slow down and pay attention. The stains and smudges on old recipe cards told stories of countless meals cooked and shared. Students realized they were holding more than instructions. They were holding a piece of family history. Teachers explained how recipes passed through generations, connecting students to grandparents and traditions beyond the classroom. Every card told a story, and kids began to see food as a bridge between past and present. The recipes made cooking feel less like a chore and more like an inheritance. They also carried a sense of tradition, with many cards copied from older generations. Today, recipes live on screens, easily swiped or skipped, but the old cards demanded focus. Home economics turned cooking into more than nourishment. It became a way to connect with family history. Looking back, it is clear how those simple cards carried not just instructions, but values. The edgiest kids in school wore their rebellion on their backpacks. You had razor blade keychains, spiked chains, studs, even full-on miniature weapons clipped to the zippers. It was fashion, sure, but also a little dangerous. The razor blades were often real. Dull or not, they were still metal and sharp. The spikes? Thick steel points that could scratch, stab, or tear fabric. Sometimes backpacks got caught on jackets or scraped lockers wide open. One wrong turn in the hallway and you could get poked just walking by. Kids bragged about how heavy and dangerous their gear looked. It was a form of armor, especially for anyone who felt out of place, and school staff usually looked the other way unless something bad happened. You could not sit too close to someone without risking an accidental poke. But in the 1980s and 1990s, this was cool. It was self-expression. It was how kids showed they were not like everyone else. But as school safety policies got stricter, and as more fights and injuries were reported, schools cracked down. These accessories were banned. Students were told to remove them or go home. Today, you can still find punk or goth-inspired gear, but it has to follow strict safety guidelines. The fashion survived, the hardware, not so much. And if you ever got scratched by someone's spiked backpack in the lunch line, you understand why. Chalkboards ruled the classroom in the 1970s. Not whiteboards, not smart screens. Just a slab of green or black slate and a bucket of chalk that turned every lesson into a dust storm. The teacher would scribble notes with a screech so high-pitched it could wake the dead. Then came the erasing. Back and forth with that felt block, raising clouds of fine white dust that hung in the air like fog. Sometimes they had these big rolling erasers with handles. Sometimes it was just whatever piece of cloth looked clean enough. Kids would fight over who got to clap the erasers outside, banging them together like little chalk-covered gladiators. You came back wheezing, but proud. The chalk would get under your fingernails, on your pants, in your lungs. But nobody cared. It was part of the deal. And there was nothing more thrilling than sneaking to the board during lunch to draw something goofy before the teacher walked in. Chalkboards were messy, loud, imperfect, and totally essential. They were the backdrop of every pop quiz, diagram, and last-minute lesson. And we miss that clatter and dust more than we ever thought we would. Macaroni and cheese loaf emerged as a popular variation in the 1970s when schools sought to diversify their menu offerings while still providing comforting and familiar foods. This dish takes the beloved elements of traditional macaroni and cheese, a mixture of cooked macaroni and creamy cheese sauce, and adds eggs and breadcrumbs to bind the ingredients into a solid loaf that can be easily sliced. The loaf is baked until the exterior is slightly crispy and golden, offering a textural contrast to the soft, cheesy interior. This format not only makes serving more efficient, but also reduces food waste, as the loaf can be cut into precise portions. When a child came home from school with head lice in the 1960s, the treatment was dichlorodiphenyl trichloroethane, DDT, dusted directly onto the scalp. School nurses kept canisters of the white powder in their offices. Parents bought it at the hardware store. The same chemical compound that had been sprayed in massive quantities across Pacific battlefields during World War II was now being rubbed into the hair of 6-year-olds, rinsed out over kitchen sinks, and absorbed through the thin skin behind their ears. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring had warned the country about DDT's environmental devastation as early as 1962, and President Kennedy ordered his Science Advisory Committee to investigate. But the chemical stayed legal for human use. The U.S. military quietly removed DDT from its own supply system in 1965 after body lice developed resistance to it. American kids apparently were not given the same consideration. The EPA did not ban DDT until 1972. The bathroom was the worst room in the house for lead paint, and the reason was moisture. Lead-based paint-covered walls, windowsills, and trim in homes built through the late 1970s. Dutch Boy and other brands contained as much as 50% lead by dry weight. In a bathroom, steam from daily showers caused the paint to blister and peel faster than anywhere else. Chips landed on the floor, in the sink, along the tub's edge where toddlers could grab them. Lead paint chips taste sweet, which made them dangerous to any child who put things in their mouth. The CPSC banned lead-based residential paint in 1978, but the rule covered new products only. Nobody had to strip the paint already on their walls. The CDC later documented that average childhood blood lead levels fell from 15 micrograms per deciliter in the late 70s to 1.4 by 2008. The He-Man power sword turned every backyard into a battlefield. Inspired by the cartoon hero himself, the hard plastic sword was big, bright, and built for action. Every child who held it shouted, "I have the power!" usually before whacking a sibling or neighbor. There was a kind of magic in that sword, especially when paired with the He-Man action figures in Saturday morning reruns. Kids wore makeshift capes made from bath towels and staged epic battles in the yard, believing they were saving the universe. Of course, those heroic duels often ended with someone crying, a broken toy, and a lecture from an exhausted parent. The sword's tough design meant it could take a beating, but that also meant it delivered one. Black eyes, bruised arms, and a few broken lamps later, parents started realizing this toy might have been too realistic. The problem was not just the sword, it was the energy it unleashed in every kid who wielded it. The toy was eventually reworked with softer plastic, but by then, countless kids had already discovered their inner warrior and their parents' limits for patience. It remains one of the most iconic but dangerous toy weapons of the decade, symbolizing both the imagination and chaos that defined 1980s playtime. Chlorofluorocarbon cooking sprays were kitchen staples throughout the 1980s, making it easy to coat pans and grease baking sheets with just a quick press of a nozzle. These aerosol cans sat beside stoves in nearly every home, used daily for frying eggs and preparing roasts. The spray came out in a fine mist that felt almost magical compared to pouring oil or spreading butter by hand. Families loved the convenience, and nobody thought twice about what propelled that mist out so effortlessly. But chlorofluorocarbons, the gases that made aerosol sprays work, were silently drifting upward and destroying the ozone layer that protects the planet from harmful radiation. Scientists discovered the damage and raised alarms that eventually reached policymakers worldwide. The ban on chlorofluorocarbons came as part of international agreements to protect the atmosphere, and cooking sprays were forced to switch to different propellants. Shoppers barely noticed the change in their kitchens, but the shift marked one of the first times a common grocery product was pulled for environmental reasons rather than direct health concerns, a reminder that what we spray indoors can affect the entire world. Every kid in the 1980s owned a bicycle, and almost none of them owned a helmet. You rode to school, to the arcade, to the creek and back with nothing between your skull and the asphalt, but a bad haircut and good luck. The modern bicycle helmet was not introduced until 1975, and fewer than 5% of child cyclists wore one throughout the decade. No state required helmet use for kids until California passed a limited law in 1987 covering only passengers under 5. The CPSC estimated that 50,000 children under 15 suffered serious head injuries from bicycle accidents every year. New Jersey became the first state to require helmets for all child cyclists in 1992, and fatalities in the state dropped from 10 to 2 in the first full year. In the 1970s, grocery shopping with children often meant letting them stand inside the cart, lean over the sides, or ride on the front like they were surfing a metal wave. Parents pushed the cart faster than they should have, racing down aisles while kids squealed with laughter. Some children balanced on the lower bars or dangled their legs out like they were riding a parade float. No one stopped to consider the danger of tipping over or hitting a shelf. It was simply part of the weekly routine. Grocery stores did not have warning signs or strict policies, and employees rarely said a word even when a child was clearly on the verge of toppling out. Parents believed that children needed to have fun wherever they could, especially during chores that otherwise bored everyone to tears. Today, retail safety guidelines strictly prohibit these behaviors because cart accidents are far more serious than people once realized. Modern carts carry warning labels, stores enforce rules, and many parents are hyper-aware of injuries that can result from falls. What was once a harmless distraction is now treated as a preventable accident waiting to happen. In 1973, the Recreation Equipment Company advertised its Super Spiral slide as providing an exciting spiraling ride with a strong bucket-shaped sliding surface and high sides holding its riders safely in the center. That description was generous. The Spiral Tornado slide was a tightly wound steel chute that corkscrewed downward from heights of 8 to 12 feet, accelerating riders through narrow turns where arms and legs could jam against the walls at speed. Centrifugal force pushed small bodies toward the outer edge, and the low side walls on many models were not high enough to keep a child from tipping over mid-spiral. In summer, the enclosed metal curves concentrated solar radiation, and the steel surface could reach temperatures that left friction burns on bare skin. These slides sat in schoolyards across the country for years, and the CPSC had no published standard to measure them against. Walk past the faculty lounge in any 1980s school, and you could smell it before you reached the door. Cigarette smoke hung in visible layers above a coffee pot, a microwave, and a table covered in half-graded papers. Teachers smoked between periods, during planning time, and in some buildings, during staff meetings while discussing curriculum. A 1988 survey by the National School Boards Association, conducted alongside the American Cancer Society, found that many districts had no tobacco policy at all. In elementary schools without a dedicated lounge, teachers ducked behind the building or stepped into a hallway corner. When districts finally banned indoor smoking on campus, teachers moved to their cars in the parking lot, creating a daily ritual visible to every kid who looked out the window during class. Patriotism was mandatory in the 1970s classroom. Every morning began with the Pledge of Allegiance, and refusing to stand was seen as an act of defiance. Students who stayed seated or silent could face detention, suspension, or even expulsion. It was less about love of country and more about enforcing obedience. Some kids quietly mouthed the words to avoid punishment, while others looked down at their desks, hearts pounding in defiance they could not voice. A few brave ones refused entirely, sparking whispers, outrage, or even calls to their parents. Those moments turned a daily routine into a test of loyalty no child should have had to face. Teachers were expected to report disrespectful students, and principals treated it like insubordination. Few questioned whether forcing loyalty was loyalty at all. Many children recited the words automatically, their voices blending into a rhythm they never truly thought about. Decades later, the idea of punishing someone for silent protest feels completely un-American, yet that was the daily reality. The 1970s may have looked free and expressive on the surface, but inside the classroom, conformity was law. Partially hydrogenated vegetable shortening was the invisible ingredient that made everything in the cafeteria taste better, richer, and more satisfying than it had any right to be. Cooks used it for frying, baking, and greasing every pan that produced the foods children loved most. The shortening came in large containers beside industrial stoves, scooped out by the cupful and melted into recipes passed down through decades of school food service. Nobody questioned it because nobody knew there was anything to question. Trans fats extended shelf life, improved texture, and cost far less than butter or other alternatives. The cookies were flakier, the pie crusts more tender, and the fried foods crispier because of this single ingredient that touched nearly everything on the menu. But scientists discovered that trans fats raised bad cholesterol while lowering the good kind, creating a cardiovascular danger that lurked in every bite. When evidence became undeniable, regulators banned partially hydrogenated oils entirely. School kitchens had to reformulate everything, replacing the shortening that had defined cafeteria cooking for generations. The foods remain, but they taste different now. Writing and following a household budget was a central part of the curriculum. Students were asked to imagine they had a job, a family, and bills to pay. They created budgets on paper, balancing rent, groceries, utilities, and extras like entertainment. Teachers emphasized the importance of spending less than you earned and saving for emergencies. Budgeting showed students that money was not abstract. It was survival. It was a lesson in trade-offs. A new pair of shoes might mean less money for groceries, and every choice had weight.
Kids learned quickly that numbers on paper translated into real-life comfort or stress. The practice taught discipline in a way no textbook could, because every fake dollar on the page represented something real in life. Students felt the weight of deciding between wants and needs, and it stuck with them. Budgeting became less about math and more about learning priorities. Every choice had a consequence, and discipline meant the difference between stability and stress. Today, apps track spending automatically, but in the 1970s, the responsibility was entirely on you. Home economics gave kids a glimpse of what adulthood demanded and prepared them to face it head-on. Looking back, it feels like one of the most important lessons schools ever offered. There was a time when walking into the school cafeteria meant facing a lineup of vending machines that looked like they came straight out of a candy commercial. Rows of chocolate bars, sour straws, bags of chips, and soda cans chilled just right, all waiting to be yours with a few quarters. It was every kid's dream. You could buy a full can of soda at 8 in the morning, pair it with a pack of gummy worms, and call it breakfast. And no one stopped you. These machines were placed in hallways, gyms, even right outside classrooms. Teachers used them. So did students. Some kids brought in rolls of quarters just for snack time. Others skipped lunch entirely and loaded up on sugar. It was not uncommon to see a kid crash by third period, groggy and glassy-eyed. The worst part? No one was tracking how much anyone ate. But over time, schools started noticing a rise in sugar crashes, hyperactivity, and mid-morning naps. Health experts stepped in. New guidelines were passed. Schools began replacing soda with juice, candy with granola bars. Eventually, many banned the machines entirely, or kept them off limits during school hours. Today's students still get snacks, but they are carefully approved and often kind of sad. If you ever bought a chocolate bar and soda as your lunch and called it a win, you lived in a golden and now banned era of school snacking. Every classroom had one. That long strip of letters running above the chalkboard showing the perfect way to write in cursive. Capital A to lowercase z with loops, tails, and curves so smooth they looked like art. In the 1970s, cursive was serious business. You practiced it every day, filled entire notebooks with drills, and had to learn how to connect letters like it was a secret code. Teachers would walk down the aisles, checking your loops, making sure your capital Q did not look like a number 2. And let us not even talk about how brutal lowercase z was. That chart above the board stared you down every class, like, yes, I am elegant. You, try harder. It was both inspiration and pressure. You tried to copy those curves exactly. Maybe you got close. Maybe your handwriting looked like spaghetti. Either way, cursive class was its own kind of rite of passage. Everyone had a different style, but the goal was always the same. Write like a grown-up. Write like someone who meant business. And even if you forgot how to do it today, you still remember the feel of your pencil dragging across the page in slow, careful loops. Creamed corn is prepared by cooking sweet corn kernels until tender and then mixing them with a creamy sauce made from milk, butter, and a thickener such as flour or cornstarch. Seasoned lightly, usually with salt and pepper, and sometimes enhanced with sugar to bring out the natural sweetness of the corn, creamed corn is a favorite in school cafeterias for its smooth, slightly sweet flavor profile that appeals to young eaters. This dish serves as an excellent way to incorporate vegetables into students' diets in a form that is generally more palatable to children who may be picky eaters. Its popularity in schools is reinforced by its nutritional content, offering a good source of fiber and vitamins while being gentle on young stomachs. Creamed corn's ability to be kept warm in serving trays without losing texture or flavor makes it particularly suited to the cafeteria setting, where dishes need to remain appealing throughout the serving period. The mercury thermometer was the most trusted instrument in your mother's medicine cabinet. A thin glass tube filled with liquid mercury that she slid under your tongue and held there for 3 minutes while you tried not to bite down. When the glass cracked, and it always did, tiny silver beads of elemental mercury scattered across the bathroom floor. Kids chased them with their fingers, pushing the droplets together into larger blobs, fascinated by the way the liquid metal moved. Nobody called poison control. Mercury vapor, invisible and odorless,
drifted upward from the tile while the family tried to sweep the beads into a dustpan. A single broken thermometer contains enough mercury to contaminate a small room above safe exposure limits. At least 13 states have since banned mercury thermometers entirely. Swinging gates were never the centerpiece of any playground. They were the forgotten piece of equipment tucked near the entrance or along a fence line. A metal gate hung on a pivot post, and kids would stand on the bottom rail and ride the arc back and forth like a low-speed pendulum. The problem was the hinge. The gap between the gate's moving frame and the stationary post narrowed as the gate swung shut, creating a crushing point that could trap fingers, hands, or a small wrist between two pieces of steel. There was no guard plate, no hinge cover, no mechanism to slow the closing action. The CPSC would later classify pinch points and shearing mechanisms as primary hazard categories in playground equipment, but during the 1970s, the swinging gate had no safety classification at all. It was just a gate. Schools kept them because they were cheap and functional, and nobody thought to file a complaint until a child got hurt. 60 rules that were just called parenting back then, now sitting in law books as offenses. It is hard to believe how much the world changed in a single generation. If you remember living through any of these, drop a comment and tell us which one surprised you the most. And if you have not already, subscribe so you never miss another trip down memory lane. Thanks for watching.